That's the idea that as members of a human family, we must get into our mind that we are not free until all of us are free. But if there are those among us that are not afforded their freedom, their right to self-determination, then we are not all free.
Dr. Siyabulela Mandela, you're very welcome to Summit Sessions. Thank you for your time and welcome back to Canada. I think a good place to start our conversation was your experience in accessing global events. Firstly, with respect to events, how important are these onstage conversations for moving the needle forward in terms of functional dialogue, progressive dialogue to activate change within movement and the driving of movement?
That is a very, it's a very important question. For me, if we are to realize true transformation of our societies, our countries, and the world as a whole, and if we are true and honest about change, we ought to be deliberate about it, and we ought to take steps towards driving that change. And I think for me, spaces such as these, spaces such as collision, where a platform is created for us to engage in an honest and a critical discussion, to dialogue about the issues that are very much of critical importance to the development of our communities, to the transformation of society as we know it, and that are critical in driving that change. Platforms such as collision then ought to be celebrated. They ought to be celebrated because they provide space for voices that would otherwise not be included in the international dialogue about change. They provide space for critical engagement for activists that would otherwise not be given space to talk about issues that are not even given space in a global debate. For instance, oftentimes, I think for the longest of times, in each and every stage in collision or at Web Summit, I always bring into the table the question of Israel and Palestine, and to ask why is the world so quiet when so much injustice is happening against the people of Palestine. That wouldn't be possible if collision didn't take a deliberate step and a practical expression that we need to bring about the change in the world. And the best way in which we can bring that change is to create a platform where we can have a dialogue about how that change would look like. So for me, spaces such as these are very instrumental towards driving the change that is so necessary in the world as we know it today. There's so much that is happening that needs change. There's so much that is happening that needs confrontation. There's so much that is happening that needs us to be critically engaging with such injustices and critically holding accountable those that are contributing to such injustice. And when spaces such as collision, spaces such as Web Summit are created for us to have that conversation that would otherwise not be created in other spaces, then we ought to celebrate that. And then, therefore, we ought to also contribute in making sure that space is always created. Remember, collision draws people from different walks of life. Here we have about 35,000 audience coming from different countries. If they have an opportunity to be engaged in conversation that they would otherwise not have an opportunity to be in, that is the beginning of change. That is where change begins. It begins with dialogue. That's how that dialogue then translates into action. And that action translates into transformation and the change that we need.
And building on that, in terms of bringing a global audience, there's been quite a issue with visa access, particularly in this event more than any. But in terms of, and you yourself, we had a bit of a roller coaster with the visa fiasco, and It's not the first time, and it's not the last time. At least not, well, for Canada for 10 years we're good. But in general, how do you feel about the current barriers in an inequality of visa international access? We've had founders of unicorns, of startups that are billion-dollar valuated organizations in Africa having their visa rejected, companies that have raised millions of dollars for no reason. Can you speak a little bit towards this topic?
I think that's a very important topic because it affects many of us who are coming in third world countries who find it difficult to be in spaces such as these that create a platform for us to participate in a global debate that seeks to bring about the change and transformation of our communities. The difficulties that I myself, coming from South Africa, a very democratic country, the difficulties that I have to go through in order to come to Canada, or any other country in Europe or in the West, for instance, it's a very stressful process. And it is a very dehumanizing process as well. It is extremely impossible for me to come to countries such as these without being dehumanized at first. I must prove that I can afford to come. I must prove that I have money. I must prove that I have traveled. I must provide a track record. I must make sure that my previous passports, I keep them so that I can provide a track record to say, here is a list of a number of passports that I've used to travel before. Please open your gates for me. And I promise I'm going to leave the country as soon as my business is off. That is a dehumanizing process. I must provide my bank statements, which is information that is confidential to me, but I must hand over my bank statements, to an immigration officer and prove that I have money. So therefore, they must enable for me to come to their country. Whereas when they come to our countries, they are not asked to provide a proof record of their financial status. They are not asked to provide their bank statements. They are not taken through the same dehumanizing process. I mean, as you are saying, brother, there are many leading champions of industries from different parts of the African continent and even in India who could not be in this conference today because their visas were denied. They were denied because of the countries and the track record of the countries that they are coming from, and because of the inequality in the visa application process itself. How is it that it's easy for Americans and Canadians to come and fly to South Africa or any other African countries, but it is extremely impossible for us and difficult for us to travel, to just come and conduct business in Canada, to just come and engage and contribute in the public debate that seeks to bring about change and transformation in our countries and the world as we know it today? Why is it that difficult? For me, I think there has to be a standardized way. There has to be some sort of a global citizenship kind of a travel document that enables everyone, access to travel. It can be that, people who are leading multi-million and very productive companies in their own countries that are contributing in the development of their own countries are denied to participate in an international conference focused on innovation and technology. And they are denied simply because of the countries that they come from. For me, that kind of inequality is very problematic. And it's something that we need to question. Why there's so much level of inequality on travel? How is it doesn't make any sense. My dream growing up was to be a diplomat. And one of those of things that I said to myself I will champion when I get an appointment as a South African diplomat in any country is to deal with the inequalities within travel, is to make sure that the requirements for travel between South Africa and that particular country or any other country are standardized so that everyone is afforded an opportunity. There's no one who just wants to come in Canada and settle. Not all of us have an aspiration to leave our countries, but we just simply want to travel so that we can be able to conduct business, so that we can be able to equally participate in shaping the global debate towards driving the change and the transformation that is so needed in our community. So I think that is very important. That is very important discussion. The question, I hope the immigration office in Canada will take it that's very serious, and any other countries that participate in global conferences such as this, they at least find a humanizing way, to standardize the visa application process so that all citizens of the world can be afforded equal opportunities to travel and conduct business and contribute in shaping the world.
Perfect. Thank you, Siyabulela. You get asked a lot of questions, you get a lot of interviews. I was curious, is there a question that you wish people would ask you or that no one's asked you before? Is there an area that you feel like you'd wish you were getting asked more about?
Well, I think the question that people hardly ask me or never ask me is, what does freedom mean? I grew up in a country that emerged out of a very violent and vicious system of oppression, such as colonialism and apartheid. And while we managed to defeat such violent systems, we are still not a free nation. That is why for us, the notion of freedom is of critical importance. That is why even I think one of the contributing leaders to the liberation movement in South Africa, such as Nelson Mandela, said, to be free means to live in a way that respects the freedom of others. So for me, what does freedom mean? Freedom means to me that all persons that are living under injustice must be free. It means for me to be free, my neighbor must be free. For me to be free, all persons in the world, regardless of their creed, their religion, the color of their skin, must be free. So therefore, freedom means to me, my freedom is not complete until the freedom of other marginalized groups and people around the world. That is why we continue this activism. It is informed by an idea that my freedom is not complete until the freedom of others. This is at least how I define what it means to be free. It means the people in Afghanistan must be free. It means the people in Ukraine must be free. The same way the people in the Tigray region in Ethiopia must be free. The same way the people in Venezuela must be free. The same way that the people of Palestine must be free. That's what freedom means for me. But if there are still others that still live under subjugation, oppression, one form of subjugation or oppression, and is exacted against a particular group in society, then our freedom as members of human family is not complete. I think that's the idea that as members of a human family, we must get into our mind that we are not free until all of us are free. But if there are those among us that are not afforded their freedom, their right to self-determination, then we are not all free. That is why Nelson Mandela said it himself, that our freedom as people of South Africa is not complete until the freedom of the people of Palestine. And he was not only talking about Palestine alone, he was also talking about other marginalized groups around the world. So that is the question that I think people don't ask. Maybe we have a very limited definition or narrow definition of what freedom is. For me, I am relatively free, but my freedom is not complete. And that is how I define my freedom, on the basis of your freedom as my neighbor and other members of the human race.
Perfect. Siyabulela, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it.